So Luke and Tim are handing out is a handout that we'll basically refer to at the beginning of every class, Lord willing, over this summer. This will hopefully give you an idea of, as we move through the book of Hosea, where we are in that book and what's going on around the particular text that we're looking at. So I'd like to give just enough information to get you really interested in the background of the book and then leave you there. So that seems kind of cruel, but I figure if I give you that much and I kind of pique your interest in some way, you might go off and do some things on your own. And so this introduction is all I'm going to give you about the background of the book. We'll talk about it a little bit as it becomes pertinent for the text. But when you think about the book of Hosea, it's not really one of those happy books. It's not one of those books that you look at like the book of Philippians and say, wow, I'm really glad we're doing this study. At least at the beginning. Hopefully, give me like 13 weeks, I think it is. And Lord willing, you'll have a different view of the book. But the book is kind of one of those that might take a little while to get into. And the reason why is because it's subject. It's not really that hard of a book to understand. But it's a hard book to read. If you turn over to John chapter 6, Jesus found this out himself in his own ministry. Here he is trying to talk to the Jews about his own sacrifice in the flesh, and alluding to the fact that his disciples would remember that through the partaking of the Lord's Supper. So you get down to John chapter 6 and verse 60, and listen to what the Jews say after he tells them this. Therefore, many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, "This is a hard saying. Who can listen to it? Or who can hear it?" Is literally the word there. The idea, unfortunately, the New King James uses the word understand there. That's wrong. The idea there is not that Jesus was saying anything difficult. He was just saying something hard. It was hard to hear. Once they heard those words coming out of the mouth of Christ, the words themselves grated against their ears. Because it was hard to accept. It wasn't hard to understand. They just didn't want to believe it. But notice what happens. Jesus talks to his disciples, and he says, "Does this offend you? What then if you were to see the Son of Man ascend where he is going?" So others turn away from Christ after this moment. But down in verse 67, Jesus said to the 12, "Do you also want to go away?" But remember what Simon Peter says in reply. "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." You think about then how that applies to a book like Hosea. There are some things in the Bible that are hard to understand because we're not that original audience. There are other things in the Bible that are hard to understand because we really don't want to understand them. We know where God's going with what God's saying, and it's hard. He's requiring something of us that we don't naturally want to give him. But God speaks anyway. And as you'll see in the book of Hosea, the reason why God speaks is because God is willing to put himself out there in unrequited love for his people for a time. God is willing to accept rejection only because he'll use the punishment that he imposes upon his people ultimately to bring them back. So when you turn over to the book of Hosea, in those opening verses, the very first verse tells us the time frame that this all takes place in. The book begins, "The word of the Lord that came to Hosea the son of Beeri in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam the son of Joash, king of Israel." So to set that up in your mind a little bit, this is about the year 750 or so, the middle of the 8th century BC. So about 750 years before Christ came. Now you think about where Israel has gone in their history before that point. They walked out of the Exodus in Egypt around the year 1445. Moses begins to write down much of what we now know as the Pentateuch, those first 5 books of the Old Testament, about the year 1440. This is 700 years after Moses wrote. 700 years after Sinai. 700 years after the stone tablets. 700 years since the tabernacle has been sitting and walking and moving among God's people. 700 years. So sometimes when you get to a book like Hosea and you realize how badly Israel has messed things up for themselves, it's kind of easy sometimes to be harder on them than we would be on ourselves. What were we doing 700 years ago? We were still writing books. We weren't printing books. We were still speaking other languages. Middle English was there, but if you know how to speak Middle English, we'll talk afterward because that's kind of exciting. When you think, though, about what was going on in world history 700 years ago, that was a long time ago. Think about what we've forgotten in the last 700 years. Now, hopefully, in 700 years, our children will not have forgotten as much as we did. But we know that's probably not the case. And the position Israel finds themselves in the 8th century is that they have allowed the peace and prosperity of the things going around them to distract them. All these good things are going on around them, so they figure, well, why do I need God? They look at the nations around them. They see the power houses around them. Egypt down to the south, Assyria up to the north, and a little to the east. And they say, well, we can be like them. We can have a stronger military. We can bolster our national defense. We don't need God to defend us anymore. We'll see that theme come up just in the opening chapters of the book. Instead, what you see is they turn from God, and so God judges them the only way He can to try to bring them back, which is to take away the good things He had given. So when you look at what's going on in the book of Hosea, that's the historical situation. That's what's going on in the 8th century before Christ. But here's what's going on spiritually. God tells Hosea to do something extremely difficult. And when He tells him to do this extremely difficult thing, He's not telling us to go and imitate Hosea. He's telling us that we need to listen to the words Hosea gives to his own wife, Gomer. Now I'm going to mess up those names probably once a week for the next 13 weeks. Hosea is the husband, Gomer is the wife. This is the disclaimer at the beginning of the class. The names will become mixed at one point or another. So when you look at Hosea, what I'd like to do is just dive into the book. The reason why is because as you read it, imagine you are that Israelite, essentially 2,800 years ago, hearing this read to you for the first time in worship. Here they are gathered together, and somebody has written down Hosea's words, probably Hosea himself, and now you are having them read to you. And then as these words are read to you, think about what it means to you to be called the terms that God uses for His own people. So look at what God says, starting in verse 2. When the Lord began to speak by Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go, take yourself a wife of harlotry, and children of harlotry, for the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord." So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Now the word harlotry is a lot softer than maybe some of your translations use. If you're reading the ESV, it's definitely softer. But when you look at the word, what that means, God essentially tells the prophet, I want you to go marry a prostitute. Go marry a prostitute. And then he tells him essentially why. For the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord. You begin to grasp very quickly how it must have felt to live in those northern tribes of Israel and to hear Hosea's words the first time. God Himself has just looked down upon you and called you a prostitute. Your faithfulness to me, prostitution, harlotry. Now notice what he goes on and says though. He says in verse 3, she conceived and bore him a son. That was the second part of that promise, right? Or that command. Go take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry. Now we see that kind of language used not only in the book of Hosea. Ezekiel actually uses it quite a bit himself. But Hosea is the one who uses that whole motif, that whole idea, that whole symbol to reveal God's message to His people. About just how far they had fallen. They had fallen as individuals. They had fallen as people. And only through God would they ultimately be redeemed. So if you look over in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul says essentially that this same thing can happen to us. This isn't an Old Testament principle that then goes and dies on the cross of Jesus. Jesus fulfills this book. But He fulfills this in a way that reminds us that we have something to learn from their experience. So 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 2. Paul writes, "For I am jealous for you with godly jealousy. For I have betrothed you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ." But notice verse 3. "But I fear lest somehow as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ." You see, sin tries to make it harder than it really is. But the simplicity of Christ, the purity of being the betrothed one who is waiting for the bridegroom on that last day, seems to fade away when we get distracted by the things of this life. But Paul says that same thing can happen. You have been betrothed. The wedding hasn't happened yet. You are waiting for your wedding. How do you behave? If you look over at Revelation chapter 2, we know, and from experience, that we don't always get that right. We don't always live our lives the way we've been called to as the betrothed bride of Christ. So Revelation chapter 2, listen to what Christ himself again says to the church of Thyatira. And I gave her time, in verse 21, to repent of her fornication, and she did not repent. Now the church of Thyatira probably had a lot of things going on. If you look up there in verse 20, fornication was only one of their problems. Idol worship was another one. But when Christ looks for a word to sum up the way the church at Thyatira was relating themselves to him, he chooses the word fornication. You know what Greek word they use over there in Hosea for harlotry? Fornication. Porneia. It's the exact same word. What God is telling his people in Hosea they have done is the same thing that Paul warns and then John warns the church not to do, which is essentially to fall away from their first husband, their first love, as Christ also tells the church at Ephesus. So when you look at what Hosea has been called to do, God is not trying to get you to become more like Hosea. He's definitely not trying to get you to become more like Gomer. What he's trying to do is get you to become more like him. He's trying to show you the kind of radical love he has shown you so that you might change the way you live to begin showing him that same kind of radical love. Now, Hosea isn't the only prophet who's been called to do strange things. Jeremiah wasn't told to marry. In fact, he was told not to marry. Ezekiel has been married for decades, and when his wife dies, God tells him, you may not mourn for your wife. Isaiah is told to walk naked and barefoot for 3 years as a sign of exile to God's people. And Ezekiel is told to bake bread, an unclean act, over human dung. All symbols God uses to wake the people up from their sins. And when you read the book the first time, you might be thinking, why on earth does God use that symbol? And really the better question is, how on earth did it get so bad that those symbols come to the mind of our Lord? How did things get so bad among God's people that God has to compare them to a prostitute to get them to even begin to listen? Now I'm going to flash forward a little bit to the end, because here's the sadder part. They don't. They don't listen. Even when God calls them a prostitute and sends them the prophets, they don't repent. And so only years after Hosea is done, within a single generation, Assyria is going to come and take the 10 northern tribes of Israel away. And they don't come back. Those 10 tribes don't. There's a return from exile for Judah. There isn't a return from exile for Israel. The 10 northern tribes walk away from God, there in verse 2, by departing from the Lord, forsaking the Lord, as he says. So notice what he then says down in verses 4 and 5. It picks up with his first son that Gomer bears. It says, Then the Lord said to him, Hosea, call his name Jezreel. For in a little while I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel in the house of Jehu, and bring it into the kingdom of the house of Israel. It shall come to pass in that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. So he gives significance to this name. And Jezreel is definitely a name that, if you're familiar with the biblical text, will hopefully come to mind. It's not a happy place. Okay, the first time you have real mention of it, there's a man named Naboth who has a vineyard. It's a great vineyard. In fact, it's so great, somebody else wants it. You remember who? Ahab wants the vineyard. Ahab mourns the fact that he can't get this vineyard and can't convince Naboth to sell the inheritance of his fathers. So what does his wife have done? So Jezebel has Naboth killed, and then now the king Ahab can go in and essentially assume the vineyard as his own property. Well, God sees things like that. And God has a sense of poetic justice. So guess what also happens in Jezreel? It's a place where Jezebel is thrown out head first when Jehu, the next king, comes into power and destroys the house of Ahab. But guess what happens? Jehu hasn't learned his lesson. In fact, it's his house that's on the throne now as Hosea writes these words. Jehu is making all the same mistakes that Ahab was making at the beginning of Jehu's reign. They haven't learned the lesson. This isn't 700 years ago. This is the last dynasty. This is the last party in power, and they still haven't learned the lessons. And so when they say the word Jezreel, it rings. It rings with the unrighteous death, the unjust death of Naboth, and the righteous death of Jezebel. And God says, Jehu, you're the next one. I'm coming for you. So when you look at what he says here, he's essentially making the point that I've come to you and spoken to you before. He spoke to Jehu and told him exactly what his will for him was. Jehu started out correctly. He started throwing out idols from the land. He started restoring the land to worship the Lord. But then he stopped. And then everybody after him kept going further and further. It goes back to verse 2. For the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord. Well, this isn't the only child in the book. We begin again in verse 6. And she conceived again and bore a daughter. Then God said to him, call her name Lo-ruhamah, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, that I may forgive them at all. Yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah, will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow, or by sword, or battle, by horses, or horsemen. Now, did you notice anything missing in verse 6? It doesn't say her name yet. There's somebody missing. Hosea. I'll read again verse 3, and then I'll read verse 6. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Verse 6, and she conceived again and bore a daughter. Who's missing? Hosea. Lo-ruhamah is born and doesn't know who her daddy is. And that's a sad fact in our society today. It's a sad fact among the people of God 2,800 years ago. Her dad's not there. Hosea, or Hosea's wife, conceives a child without Hosea now. And they call her Lo-ruhamah. You probably have a footnote there. Your translation uses the translation of the text. What is it? No mercy. No mercy. For I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, that I may forgive them at all. Now notice though, things haven't gotten quite as bad yet in Judah. In verse 7, there's this glimpse of hope that the southern kingdom is not going to go the way of Israel. He says, yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah. Will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by the bow. So he says there is some hope for God's people. As he'll say later on in the book of Romans and 1 Corinthians as well, there's always a remnant. And that remnant of grace is still there. And at this time, that remnant is Judah. But things are not looking so well in Israel. And so notice what happens. He uses the same phrase he used back in verse 5. It shall come to pass in that day that I will break the bow of Israel. I will break the bow of Israel. The bow was a symbol of military strength. Not just an actual weapon, but just the same way we would use the sword. You know, we don't even use swords, it's kind of sad, anymore. But when you look at the way we talk about bearing the sword, we know exactly what you're talking about. Well, for them, that word was the bow. And the bow was their symbol of a warrior's power. God says, I will break their bow. I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. But notice what he says about Judah then in verse 7. How does he turn that image around? I will not save them by the bow. See, when we think of the word deliverance, we're looking for great power. We're looking for something or someone to come in and completely change our situation by destroying our enemies. And when you look at what God says here, the promise he makes to Judah, he says, I will not save them by the bow, nor by sword, or battle, by horses or horsemen. So how does he save them? I will save them by the Lord their God. Think about what he just said. God says, I will save them by the Lord their God. Now why is God speaking in the third person? I will save them by the Lord their God. God's saying, I will save them by myself. That is a Hebrew figure of speech. But for those of us who have read the rest of the Bible, we know where God is heading with this. He's not going to save Israel and Judah by any mighty power. Judah is never going to become the great military power that they hoped they would become. They had misread those prophecies. You know, Christ says the exact opposite in Mark 10:45, right? For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many. This is an allusion to the fact that Judah's ultimate salvation is not going to come from the military power they so sought from their neighbors and their allies. It's not going to come from the peace and prosperity they think they enjoy at this height of the reign of Jehu and his descendants. What the prophet says is, you're only going to be who you are meant to be in me. It goes back to Ephesians 1, right? When you're in God, when you're in Christ, in the Messiah, when you're with God and standing with him, you are his. That's where mercy is. And it has nothing to do with your own strength. I will break their bow in the valley of Jezreel. So notice what he goes on and said in verses 8 and 9. Now when she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. Then God said, call his name Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God. So what is the same in verse 8? Hosea is still not around. What else? What does that name, Lo-Ami, mean? Not my people. Not my people. Now, when you think about that phrase, hopefully that sounds familiar. But hopefully that's not the way you remember it. If you turn back to the book of Exodus, the very beginning of God's history with Israel as a nation. They've been in Egypt for over 400 years. God is speaking to Moses on the mountain. And listen to what he says in Exodus 6 down in verse 7. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God who brings you out from the burdens of the Egyptians. He says, you will be my people, and I will be your God. And you will know that I am the Lord. You will know. Now, when you look at what he says here, you're going to see that word know come up several times in the book of Hosea. 18 times the prophet uses that word to summarize and to represent Israel's relationship with God. It wasn't just an intellectual knowledge. They would know who the Lord was because of what they had seen him do. They would see him deliver them out of slavery in Egypt. They would see him lead them into the promised land. They would see the miracles, the dividing of the Red Sea, the quail, the manna. They would see those things and know that they had seen the Lord. So when God uses this phrase in Hosea chapter 1, he is reversing his covenant promise. He's saying the covenant has been destroyed. The relationship you have had with me, since even before Sinai, when the Ten Commandments and the rest of the law was given, has now been broken. The call of God has stopped. That's essentially what he's saying. So when you look at how that proceeds on, though, the chapter doesn't end that way. This is a pattern you're going to see over and over in the book. Hosea will essentially bring destruction 2 steps closer and then take 1 step back. He'll show the people the road they're walking down, and then he'll show them how to get back to that last turn so they can make a course correction. And so this is how the prophet ends this chapter, starting in verse 10 and going through the first verse of chapter 2. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, You are not my people. There it shall be said to them, You are sons of the living God. Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and appoint for themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land. For great will be the day of Jezreel. Say to your brethren, my people, and to your sisters, mercy shown. So there in those 3 verses, it's almost as if God corrects his own course. What words does he repeat, and how does he change them?
Expressing mercy to mercy.
You're right. He goes from no mercy to I will show mercy. He goes from not my people to my people. And then even that first child, Hosea and Gomer's son, comes back into the picture. And mention is made again of Jezreel. So when you look at those 3 words and the way God uses them, you look back at Jezreel. Jezreel, again, was not a happy place. But it was to the righteous living under Ahab and Jezebel. The day of Jezreel was a day of their deliverance. It was the day when God made things right for a time in the nation of Israel. It was a time where God showed his hand and said, I will work among you, and I will not allow this sin to continue. When you look back at those promises he makes, he essentially makes and restates those same covenant promises we just read back in Exodus chapter 6. He says, I will be your God, and you will be my people. And because you will be with me, you will find mercy. You will be once again within that covenant walk. Now, does anything else stand out to you from verse 10? Any of those phrases? The living God.
The promise of Moses is still in effect.
The promise is still in effect. Now notice they can walk away from that promise. And when they walk outside of that promise isn't theirs until what? They walk back. It's never something they can't get back to. So who did God say those words to in verse 10? If the number of your children shall be as the sand of the sea. Abraham. We're not talking just Moses anymore. We're going all the way back to Abraham.
That's why sorry.
No, absolutely, yeah. It's like you look at what God is telling the people. He's reminding them of the place. That's what he said in verse 10. In the place where it was said to them. He said, just like I can stand here and judge you, and it kills me to do it, and it will. He says, I will stand here and call to you those same words. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered. Cannot be measured or numbered. So you look back at Genesis 22, those are the words God uses to describe the promise to Abraham. When God restates his covenant with Abraham for the end of his life, he uses those exact same words. God points out to his people, You may have forgotten my covenant. I haven't. You may have left our marriage bed. I haven't. You may have left the house, but I'm here and the light's still on. You look at what God is doing with his people. God, by any definition of justice in the history of the world, could have walked away, right? But that's not who God is. And the more you dig into the book of Hosea, the more you see that love of that God come to fruition in the life of Israel. In fact, as you go throughout and look at some of these other texts throughout the Bible, you see God essentially making the same point. So turn over to Isaiah chapter 62. Isaiah is actually a younger contemporary of Hosea. So Hosea started prophesying first, and Isaiah comes along. He writes a much longer book, and everybody forgets about Hosea. It's kind of sad. So when you look at Isaiah, though, Isaiah brings out some of these same themes in his own writing. Listen to what he says in Isaiah 62, verse 4. You shall no longer be termed forsaken, nor shall your land any more be termed desolate. But you shall be called Hephzibah, in your land, Beulah. For the Lord delights in you, and your land shall be what? Married. Your land shall be married. You know, you look at the way like Isaiah sneaks in that symbol. Writing this after Hosea would have been right there in his mind. The idea that here God is, or here Hosea is, married to someone that in that society no righteous man would have ever married. He sticks with her despite these things. And as we'll see over in chapter 3, when things even get absolutely down to the bottom of her life, guess who's there to pick her back up? Hosea. Now, when you turn over to Jeremiah chapter 3, Jeremiah chapter 3, the prophet there uses a similar symbol both in verse 8 and in verse 18. Listen to what he says. Then I saw that for all the causes for which backsliding Israel had committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but went and played the harlot also. But notice verse 18. In those days the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land of the north to the land that I have given as an inheritance to your fathers. You notice the direction there in Jeremiah 3:18 and in Hosea? What direction do they lead? Out of. Out of. There's another cool word that the Greeks, and they got passages like that used to translate that word. Exodus. This is their second Exodus. They've left the land of sin and slavery once before in Egypt. But here they're going to be brought into a second captivity, a second bondage, because they turned away from God. And God essentially says, just like I am the Lord, in Exodus 6 verse 7, that you will know, because I have delivered you out of the house of bondage, you will know me, because in that day you will come out of the land of the north. You will come out. This will be your Exodus. You'll have a different time to look back in your history and know that God was there to defend you. And so these passages don't go away. Turn all the way to Romans chapter 9. So there are some things that are hard in the Bible to understand, and there are other things that are beautiful when you do, right? And when you look at the way Paul uses these verses, in Romans chapter 9, you begin to see what God is saying. And that's all he's doing. He's giving them glimpses on how he himself will come to be their deliverer. On how he himself will make himself known to his people, the church. How he will save that remnant out and unite them under one head. Romans chapter 9, starting in verse 22. What is God wanting to show his wrath and to make his power known? endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy which he had prepared beforehand for glory. Even us, whom he called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles. So where did he call the Gentiles? Notice what Paul says. As he says also in Hosea, I will call them my people who were not my people, and her beloved who was not beloved. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there they shall be called sons of the living God. You know, Hosea might be one of those stories that doesn't really seem like it's on the main storyline of the Bible. And yet as you go through the book, you begin to realize just how close it is to that center story. This book is about Christ. This book is about his people. Christ is that bridegroom. The church is that prostitute that he's redeeming from the world. It will only happen. So you turn over to 1 Peter chapter 2. And notice again the use of this covenant language that the apostles used to describe the people of Christ. 1 Peter 2, starting in verse 9. He's going to draw from two Old Testament passages here. He says, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not of him, but who are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Go ahead and read down in verses 11 and 12. Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works, which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. God writes to his people in the book of Hosea to remind them that he is the living God. He's not a God who once upon a time saved them. He's a God that provides for them now, that is coming to judge them once more. But at the same time, is going to be there on that day and will be happy. Because that's his wedding day. He's coming back for a wedding. And Israel had forgotten that. You know, you look at that charge that Peter gives to the first century church there, drawing on Hosea as well as Exodus chapter 19. He tells them, you are that chosen people. You are the bride God chose for himself. Now, we have about 5 minutes left, which means I'm going to stop. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask a couple of questions to get y'all thinking about the book in these last 5 minutes. Does it help us to view ourselves as the bride of Christ? Think about the meaning of that phrase. How does thinking of yourselves, men, you should think about this too. How does thinking about yourselves as the bride of Christ help you be the Christian you're called to be? Go ahead, sister. The bride is true. Absolutely right. What else? The faithful and only one. It's like you think about that on both of those sides. You look at what that calls us to be as his bride, and then to know that you're married to the most faithful person. Ever. One who is faithful. What else? Make sacrifices. Okay, it's not about you anymore, right? Good shape, is it? Carol's not. I don't get it. So when you think about that image of the bride, we talk about it, but I don't think we talk about it. We mention it, but we don't think about what that really means. It doesn't mean, men, that you can just start wearing dresses. Okay? What it does mean is when you look at that symbol and look at the joy that bridegroom would have for that day, knowing what the bridegroom has done to prepare for you. When Jesus wanted to come to his disciples, what did he say he was going to prepare? A place for you. It's not just his place. It's your home that you're going to be moving into. It's the home you're building together. It's like when you think about that image of the bride, and the fact that the wedding is still to take place one day, do you feel like somehow you can just break it off? I think sometimes that's the way we act. I don't think we'd ever say that. But somehow it feels less permanent. Because we'll get it together by the wedding day. Well, hopefully you did not prepare that way for your wedding day. When you think about the way you felt about that day, you think about the way God feels about coming back for his bride, and the joy he has, how does that motivate you for the way you live? So one final question. What had Israel trusted instead? What were they trusting in instead of the Lord? What was this over here? They had begun trusting in themselves. I heard something in the back row.
Everything but.
Everything but. So you're going to see him get into it a lot in chapter 2. Go ahead, sister. Absolutely right. And at this time, because you had two great superpowers who hadn't really gotten big enough to fight one another, that just meant they lived between two great economies. So to put it in modern day terms, they lived between these two great economies and shared the riches of Assyria and Egypt. Why do we need the Lord? Baal is a fertility god. Why do we need the Lord? And that was literally the question that Israel kept asking. They gave themselves the answer, and they were wrong. So there were two other things they mentioned specifically in here. It wasn't just wealth. What did God promise to come in and break?
Military might.
I will break their bow. Okay, so like you had mentioned, they had begun to trust themselves. That was over here. They had begun to trust themselves. Part of that trust came from their own financial wealth. The other part of that, they felt like they could protect themselves. They didn't need God as their defender because they had a strong enough military to protect themselves. And if they couldn't get their own military, they had enough money to go buy somebody else's. But they were wrong. God says, I will not save you by the bow, I will save you what? I will save them by the Lord their God. I will save them by the Lord their God. So when you think of what it is God is trying to get to their heads at this point, He's spoken to them before, and they haven't listened. That's why they're rebelling. So God circumvents it. He's like, I'm not talking to your head anymore. I'm going to talk to your heart. You have prostituted from me. You have forsaken me. I'm here. The promise is still out. But you need to come home. My house. My mercy. My people. So if you'll close with me in a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we come before you this night so very grateful that we have your Son as our Lord and Savior. We're grateful, Father, that you have given to us the one whom all history has waited for, and the one who even now we wait for with anticipation. We thank you, Father, for the lessons you have given us in your word, how you have made yourself known to us through the pages of this book, and Father, through the life of your Son. And we pray, Father, that you'll be with us. Help us, Father, to take that word to heart. Help us to know you as you have revealed yourself. Help us, Father, to do these things, knowing that we cannot do anything without you. And that in your strength we have all blessings. Forgive us of our sins.